When it comes to the Call of Duty franchise, I'm a bit of a different kind of Call of Duty fan. I generally enjoy buying each game every year. I see Call of Duty as my reliable popcorn entertainment. I am usually not too focused on the multiplayer, as I prefer the single player campaigns and the different co-op modes that COD has to offer. I have happily bought each COD until Black Ops 4 with no single player campaign, and with the overuse of the zombies mode I wasn't that interested. But this reboot of Modern Warfare was catching my interest for many reasons. The big one was that this was going to have a campaign again, and while Infinity Ward's The Last Call of Duty is generally not as well liked, I found the single player of Infinite Warfare to be criminally underrated. It had a great and focused story that came packaged with excellent action, memorable characters, side missions, and earned emotional moments. So with that, I was confident that when it came to the new single player campaign that Infinity Ward could deliver. On top of this, the developers announced that the composer of Infinite Warfare, Assassin's Creed Origins, and Anthem was going to compose the music for this new entry. I love her work, and she consistently manages to deliver a memorable soundtrack that I both enjoy while in the game, and something when I just want to listen to something good while at work. And lastly, I was happy to hear about the return of Spec Ops. I love this mode from Modern Warfare 2 and 3. These awesome bite-sized missions were a great way to enjoy the roller coaster of that Call of Duty action, but with a friend. And Modern Warfare 3 added in the very fun survival mode. It has been a long time since we have had Spec Ops, and while I enjoyed the survival mode from Advanced Warfare, it's just been too long since we've had this mode fully return. This new Call of Duty was checking a lot of the boxes that I would want from a new entry. Approaching the release of the game, there were alphas and betas that showed off some of the multiplayer modes, and being that I don't prefer Call of Duty multiplayer, I was pleasantly surprised with what I played. Gunfight was awesome, and I was generally enjoying the action. I found myself more and more excited for the full game. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review for Modern Warfare 2019. When it comes to the previous Modern Warfare trilogy, I love the campaigns in those games. I found them to be like Michael Bay blockbusters with badass characters, a quality villain, and many memorable set pieces. This new Modern Warfare feels like it respects the originals while trying to deal with heavier themes. The characters here are both one-dimensional and likable. Alex is a good soldier who aims to do the right thing. Garrick is similar but hates how the red tape of the military can mean that he cannot do his job the best way he can. Captain Price captures the look and feel of a seasoned warrior while giving us glimpses of his more human side. And lastly, Farah is the freedom fighter trying to help her people. Our main heroes are likable, but they do not offer a lot of depth to them. And while I wish we did get to know them a bit more, I did like that what was provided in the story was still pretty good. The story focuses on our heroes trying to locate this stolen Russian gas. The player changes perspectives, assuming the roles of different characters throughout the campaign. I'll save more of this discussion for the spoiler section, but overall I really enjoyed the campaign and the story. I really like how the game did not shy away from its bleak tone. There's a bunch of small moments where the player needs to make split-second decisions that could result in an innocent person dying. The game doesn't try to make these parts into something huge and big by shining a spotlight on it. They feel more naturally incorporated, and these parts help to sell the atmosphere. This is especially seen in the few instances where you need to slowly work your way through a building trying to figure out who your enemy is and who's an innocent. Within this sequence, the game lets you decide who the enemy is. The game lets the player make the decision to kill someone even if it turns out that they weren't an enemy. I think these moments help to elevate the campaign even more because it allows the player to reflect on the violence and potentially put themselves in the shoes of someone who had to clear a building just like that. Could you make the right call, or would you hesitate, and would that save an innocent life, or would that hesitation result in you dying? While there are levels that stand above others within this game, the levels in action are generally really good. A lot of this is because of the gun's sound effects and excellent impact. The shooting sounds more authentic here, like there's some muscle behind each of the shots. I like how the campaign was not full of long-distance firefights either. There are plenty of mid-range fights, but there's a good amount of close corridor action with a nice use of the shotguns. Like the prior Modern Warfare trilogy, this game does take inspiration from Hollywood films for some of the big set pieces. My favorite one is one that essentially puts the player into the 13 Hours Benghazi movie. It has a great build-up and execution to the onslaught of enemies that you will be facing. At the same time, the level lets you see the situation from a different perspective by controlling a civilian. It has a nice contrast from all of the soldier action. While most of the levels are very linear in their delivery, there are 2 levels that give you a bigger area and ask you to complete a few objectives. This isn't anything extensive, but the second level that gives you much more freedom is a huge environment where you get to approach it how you want. I would love to see more levels like this in the sequel. The presentation is another excellent area of the campaign. There's a lot of cutscenes and they are well acted and presented. I did have some small issues with the campaign. One was how I wish the villains had more of a presence. While we didn't really get to know Makarov on an in-depth level in the original trilogy, he had a presence to him and the games did a good job at making you hate him. With this new Modern Warfare, none of the villains are that memorable. There are a few moments that I think could have landed a bit harder on the emotion than what we got. But overall, the campaign is a brisk and engaging experience. Now let's get into some spoilers. I do wish that we got some more depth on the characters within the game. Farah is one of the more interesting characters, and that is partially because we get to see her and play as her in 2 flashbacks. I wish we could have had some cutscenes related to her rise in power. She is an interesting character, and I would have loved to see some of that growth of seeing her grow into a leader for her group. I do think that the game could have elaborated more on her and her brother. It was interesting to have one sibling go one way and the other go another, but once Farah learns of her brother's true intentions, she is dead set on killing him, and I felt like that was just a bit jarring since we didn't really have any development between the 2 of them. Also, the story just doesn't do a good job at conveying their relationship. Besides a few parts when they are young, I never felt like they were really brother and sister or had that connection between the 2 of them, especially as adults. Another area that I think could have used more development was Garrick's resentment towards the Butcher. It makes sense for any soldier to dislike the Butcher, but the way the game portrayed it was like this resentment that Garrick had for him was on a personal level. Maybe there was something left on the cutting room floor, or Garrick is focusing all of his hate for the terrorist attack that happened in the 2nd level on the Butcher. To the game's credit, I did like how the game tried to humanize the Butcher after establishing him as a killing machine. It grounded the villain a bit more and made him the most memorable of the villains that we got in this game. I have no problem in concept with Alex's sacrifice, but I think this could have been done better. He is a likable soldier, and he got a bit more interesting when he decided to abandon the military and go back with Farah. But at the end, he wants to give his life for her, and I felt like this could have been more developed to really make this moment land with more of an emotional punch. When he sacrificed himself, I ended up feeling nothing, even though the game wanted me to feel something. Lastly, I love the last bit of fan service at the end where Captain Price is forming Task Force 141. With the sequel, I would love to see the story get really personal and potentially more in depth with Captain Price. Infinity Ward did a good job at delivering some nuanced human touches to his character and performance. I think they should explore his character more in the sequel. Even with the story flaws, I love the campaign. I have completed it several times and it's one of the best parts about this game. This campaign was really appreciated considering I was greatly disappointed by World War II's story and Black Ops 4's lack of a campaign. This is a nice return to form for Call of Duty campaigns. Like I said in my intro for this video, the return of Spec Ops was one of the main reasons I was looking forward to this entry. Before the game came out, there was a blog post discussing the different modes that would be within Spec Ops. From how the post was written, it seemed like we were getting all these modes at launch. Operations was the new mode that focused on allowing the players to have large environments, allowing for replay and how you choose how you want to tackle the missions. Spec Ops Classic missions were the traditional Spec Ops missions with the 3-star system that was seen in Modern Modern Warfare 2 and 3. And then we had Survival, where you tried to last as long as you could against an onslaught of foes. While there is some fun to be had in Spec Ops, I am very disappointed with this version, along with the lack of improvement over the course of the past year, and the feeling that the developers just dropped and ignored this entire mode. Each section of Spec Ops is in need of refinement and improvement. But let's start out with the Survival mode. Essentially, you play on multiplayer maps, and you try to survive as long as you can with different waves. As you defeat enemies, you will earn money, and can spend that money on new guns, kill streaks, and equipment. The action is fun, but there is this feeling that it's not as good as the prior offerings in Modern Warfare 3 or the Exo Survival in Advanced Warfare, along with a lot of balancing issues that prevent this mode from being great. Since the survival maps are just repurposed multiplayer maps, then why can't I play survival on every multiplayer map? It's a really odd choice to not let me select all of those maps for survival. I could understand if there were specific maps for survival, but these are just the same maps seen in multiplayer. At launch, the AI was a bit odd, and it could really hurt the flow of survival. The enemies didn't really hunt you down like in other versions of survival, and in many instances, they were waiting for you behind cover just trying to pick you off. This makes some of the rounds feel less like you were trying to hold your ground against a large opposing force. And in some instances, the AI can just be really dumb. Now, the AI did receive some updates to make them more aggressive, but they don't really use any sort of tactics against you. They have an almost zombie-like behavior, and it makes for some boring enemies to fight. I think the AI needs to be tweaked more to better the entire experience. Another bad decision is both the timer between waves and how you are only allowed to buy things between waves. You can use earned money on a bunch of things, but you only have 30 seconds to run to a location and buy what you need. This is not enough time, especially on the bigger survival maps. Plus, once the round starts, you cannot buy anything until the round is over. I could understand having a 30-second breather between rounds, but let me buy stuff whenever I want to in the mode. Now, to the game's credit, they did patch in to let you buy ammo whenever you want, but this sort of stuff should have been there to begin with. The game needs to give you more time to prepare for the next wave. There's also a lack of making the waves unique. In prior entries of survival, there were different types of enemies that helped to keep things fresh. There's a lack of that in this survival mode. One of the biggest areas that completely breaks the survival mode is when you earn the Juggernaut skill streak. While using this, you get infinite ammo, a large amount of armor, and you basically break the game if you have another friend who's in one with you. Either the Juggernaut needs to have less health, an ammo counter, or something else to make him less overpowered. The survival mode feels really undercooked compared to the prior offerings. Thankfully, I do think that with some tweaks, this mode would be a lot better, and I think the tweaks are doable with patches. But based on the prior year of updates, this area of the game feels neglected. Also, there is this general feeling of a lack of QA in this area. A lot of the issues with survival are things you would easily pick up on just playing one round. This survival mode does have some fun, but it mostly feels very lazy and disappointing compared to the prior entries for this mode. Before I get into talking about Spec Ops operations, I need to discuss the tied progression between multiplayer and co-op. All of your progression is through one profile, which sounds good in theory, but it doesn't work with its current execution. You can earn very low amounts of XP while in co-op, and it will take forever to earn new upgrades for your guns along with new weapons to use in co-op. To have better options in co-op, you are essentially forced to play the multiplayer to rank up faster. Infinity Ward can do two things to fix this: increase the amount of XP you earn for co-op, or have two separate progression systems, one being for multiplayer and the other being for co-op. Kind of like how it was done in Modern Warfare 3. This way, people who just want to play co-op and only co-op are not forced to play the multiplayer to earn better weapons. And the classic Spec Ops mission mode, which was supposed to be like the traditional Modern Warfare Spec Ops missions, is extremely disappointing as well. At launch, there was only one mission, and it didn't even have a star system either. In the prior game, these missions were awesome bite-sized missions with great urgency. In many cases, they were reimagined areas of the campaign that you could enjoy with a friend. When I booted up the game, I was confused when I only saw one mission to be found there. I am all for new free missions down the line, but to only launch with one mission is just silly, and it again makes the whole Spec Ops thing feel like an afterthought. Essentially, mission mode needs missions and good ones at that. What is also odd is that the multiplayer has a section for trials, and it lets you do some old school style Spec Ops missions that feature a star system as well. Why aren't these missions available in co-op? It makes no sense. To the game's credit, the game did provide some new Spec Ops missions, which were fun, but they came with their own issues. For one, the mission count is considerably lower compared to prior titles. Along with this, there's no option to select a difficulty for the mission. The missions feel like they are only set on veteran. In prior Spec Ops entries, you would earn stars based on what difficulties you chose. Having the option to only play on veterans sucks, considering that these missions feel more balanced for 4 players, and there's no way to have any additional balancing for less than 4 players. Some of the added missions are fun, but they lack the balancing and difficulty options that would make them more enjoyable. Now this brings us to the new branch of Spec Ops with operations. The game launched with 4 operations, and overall they did not deliver what it was advertised as. These missions lack the ability to tackle them in different ways, and a lot of this is due to the mission continually having enemies pouring in. They all feel like over-the-top sequences, and it would have been appreciated to have some variety like we saw in the campaign missions. At times, these missions seem wildly unfair, with the large amount of respawning enemies, the lack of cover, and how you cannot take many hits before you are down. People have been able to beat them, but they've also found ways to cheese the maps to make them doable, but not enjoyable. As a concept, I think these 4-man raid-like missions are a good idea, but they need more refinement along with difficulty options to make them more accessible. It is fine to have really hard options, but give us the option to then have different difficulties to choose from. To the game's credit, new operations have been added, but the execution is overall not as good for these missions. The entire Spec Ops suite gives off the impression that either the people making it had no idea what made the prior iterations of Spec Ops special, or they lack the talent to really make new versions of these modes. I was very excited to hear that this mode was coming back for this entry. This was why I bought the game, and I was very disappointed by what they offered. Now, if the developers worked to fix these areas over the course of the year, that would have been great. But based on their efforts so far, the Spec Ops mode feels like the most neglected aspect about modern warfare. Thankfully, the campaign turned out to be great, and I actually enjoyed myself with the multiplayer. I want to disclose again that this will not be the most in-depth coverage of the multiplayer. When it comes to the COD multiplayer, I'm more of a casual fan that hasn't enjoyed the multiplayer since Black Ops 1. Surprisingly, I got a lot of mileage out of the multiplayer in this game. While I noticed some flaws, one of the biggest reasons that this multiplayer appealed to me was because of this addition of the gunfight mode. This 2v2 mode gives every player in the game the same loadout and will change after a few rounds. The goal is to take out the other team or capture the endgame flag. The matches are really quick and focus less on making the best loadout, but trying to figure out how to use what you have effectively. Since everyone has the same weapons, it feels like everyone is on the same playing field. It also caters to letting players experiment with weapons that they are not good with and shine with their old favorites. When it comes to other multiplayer modes, I only really play Domination and Headquarters. I tried a few rounds of Ground War, and while I enjoyed using the vehicles, it felt like a lesser version of Battlefield, and the large amount of snipers made these modes annoying to play. I really like how Headquarters will focus up the multiplayer. I don't find myself getting randomly killed from enemies most often in this mode because you need to be near the objective to capture it or your team will lose. You start to get a bit more intimate with the knowledge of the map on a piecemeal basis. Part of the fun of Headquarters is trying to predict the next location so that you can get a head start at defending it. The defending phase can be some of the most intense parts about the game. With no respawns for the defending team, it's really rewarding to face off against the attacking team and then win. I like Headquarters, but I do feel like generally the spawns could be better in multiplayer. I have noticed other spawning issues, like popping right up right next to an enemy and then dying right away. The spawning feels inconsistent and an area that I think they need to continually work on. Earning kills is fun in multiplayer because of the sound effects and impact from your guns, along with earning the kill streaks. Earning one of these is like getting a mini personal victory, and it's addicting. Once you earn one, you find yourself continually hunting down other enemies to go higher and higher. My favorite of the new kill streaks is the Wheelson. The Wheelson is easy to control, and I love how this little tank can go into buildings and completely destroy anyone you find. And while I use shotguns in my loadout, the game really needs to balance the range of them. COD has had this history of broken shotguns before, and I hope they can keep working to balance the weapons in the game. This may seem odd, but I did like how this new entry did have you opening and closing doors. This adds an extra layer to consider, and since I tend to play very cheaply, it allows me to get some easy claymore kills. And when defending a location, closing the doors is a nice way to alert you if someone is going through it, because you're going to hear this giant slam. Sometimes you can leave a door open to bait an enemy into thinking that someone passed through here and that no one is currently there. What I do want to commend the developers on is how COD has added additional maps to provide for free to the players. This allowed the multiplayer to not segment its community, and I think it was a great move. I also enjoyed the battle pass, even if I didn't pay for it, because you still earn new weapons and items. Most of my time with the multiplayer was really spent with playing anything on shipment. When they had the 24/7 shipment playlist, I would only play this mode. This map is balls to the wall action. It's chaotic fun and an absolute blast. I also think Modern Warfare does a good job of giving you lots of things to unlock, whether it's new guns or different attachments for your weapons. I historically play the series for its co-op and single player, but this entry really grabbed my attention for many hours with its multiplayer. With this being a year old now, my interest in the multiplayer has waned, but either way, I spent a few days worth of hours in the multiplayer and had a good time with it. Lastly, the soundtrack is worth praising. I have been a fan of the composer since she did music for Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. I love the music in this entry. Here are a few tracks from the game. Modern Warfare 2019 is a solid reboot that is brought down a bit by its flaws. I absolutely enjoyed the single-player campaign. The pacing was mostly perfect, the characters are likable, the action is great with the different situations, and I love the soundtrack. The story acts like a prequel reboot to the original trilogy, and it respects the prior games. There's some well-used fan service as well. I do hope that the sequel goes a bit deeper with its characters, and I hope we get a properly well-done villain. The return of Spec Ops was what really got me excited, and I'm extremely disappointed with what they had to offer. Each of the 3 co-op modes in Spec Ops feel undercooked and more like an afterthought, and while I don't usually find myself playing COD for its multiplayer, I had a lot of fun playing Headquarters and the 2v2 gunfight mode. Multiplayer has its own issues with some weapon balancing and spawning, but overall I had a fun time with it. Modern Warfare 2019 is a fun yet flawed game. This will not change your mind if you're not a fan of the franchise, and while there are lesser areas present within the game, there's also a lot to love. At the very least, check this game out for its fun single player, and thank you very much for watching.